So it's week 47 of 2018, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen in to us here at Warehouse and Operations as a Career. I'm Marty T. Hawkins, and we try to bring you some useful and interesting information each week, at least maybe provoking a thought or two that'll help you with your careers and career planning. We try and share our experiences and love hearing about yours as well. Please take a moment to email us, host@warehouseandoperationsasAcareer.com, if you have any questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to look into for you. Okay, let's see. This week, I've had the opportunity to work with recruiting. Don't know how much help I've been, but I've lended a hand with placing ads or positions to the many different job boards and social media postings. I even helped with a job fair. You know, recruiting is where it all starts for us as applicants. I had a lot of fun and really enjoyed helping to pair great employees with just the right companies and putting people to work and getting them started, or at least seeing that they had the opportunity to turn those jobs into long-lasting careers. I have no problem sharing with you that I find recruiting to be one of the most stressful and challenging jobs that I've had to do throughout the years. As a warehouse manager, I used to interview any order selectors, forklift operators, sanitation, really for all the positions that were under my watch. Our HR generalist did a pretty good job pre-screening the applicants for us, but then I had to determine, that the position was going to be a good fit for the job and that the company and task was going to, match the applicant's needs too. I want to feel like I made some good decisions. More than a few of my hires went on to become supervisors, managers, directors, and even several vice presidents within the corporations. Now, I had to learn the hard way. More often than not, I went with that old gut feeling. If the prospect knew the terminology, could convince me he or she knew, what they were doing, they'd end up getting a chance. Throughout the years, I've been fortunate enough to hire several hundred individuals. Many took the job and worked it into a long-term career. A lot of them are still friends of mine today. Today's recruiters have so much more insight into our lives, personalities, and really our work histories. Things move at a much quicker pace. It only takes a couple of minutes to check with our work references. Background checks are all but immediate now, and some drug screenings are instant. And don't even get me started again on our social media profiles. We've talked about our profiles several times on other episodes, and each recruiter we've had as a guest on the show has urged us to make sure that they depict the personality and lifestyles that we want them to see. I assure you it's almost a guarantee that our hiring agent is headed straight to our social pages as soon as our telephone interview is wrapped up. Anyway, I actually love recruiting. I wish I was better at it. I guess I'm real comfortable with the sourcing, reviewing the resumes, and I really like both the phone interview and face-to-face interviewing, but man, there's a lot more paperwork involved now than there was back when I was doing it. These days, I get to help out every once in a while, kind of like this week, and that gives me my fix for another 6 months or so. So I'll share a few of my wins and losses that I feel like I had this week with you. One win was with a gentleman who'd only been employed with this company for about 2 months. I'd met him earlier when he first applied while he was interviewing for the position, and I really liked him. The recruiter that was hiring him had asked me to look over his resume and work history for her. He'd listed a lot of warehouse equipment, and she wasn't sure it was all legit. I spent maybe 3 minutes with the guy and concluded that he was really a pure ops guy, and I wished him luck. She hired him, and her customer really grew to like him. He was really rocking it over there on their docks. But as can happen, though, one of his facility's big orders was hung up in transit, and they were going to have a 2 to 3 week layoff until the order could come in, and it showed up. And him being the last hired, it looked like that he'd be one of the ones, to get the news. The gentleman had originally taken one of my cards and a WAOC card as well. Anyway, he reached out to myself as well as the recruiter that he'd worked with before. We both knew of another position hiring this week, and I'm happy to say he started Tuesday, only missing 1 day of earnings. He never presented anything negative. He reached out for some help, and she was able to help him with, find something that was even closer to his home and at the same pay rate. I think this new place is really even a better place and much more opportunity for growth too. I tell you what, we'll stay in contact with him. Who knows? Maybe I could reach out to him in about 6 months and get him to share his success story with us on an upcoming episode. And then here's one that left me shaking my head. I've actually done a little digging on the history of this gentleman, but I haven't found anything too far out of the ordinary. I still don't know what happened. So a recruiter said she had a gentleman on the phone and that he was pretty upset and asked if I'd like to speak with him. I answered, introduced myself, and he said, "Are you going to give me a job?" Now I had pulled up his information. By the way, for anyone that doesn't know, staffing agencies, really any employer, I guess, keeps an employee file on every associate that they've hired. It'll contain information like our hire dates, dependent information, our interview sheets, as well as all of our placements, how long we worked at each different facility, any corrective actions we may have had, and the reasons for our departure. A lot of this information is really good for things like employment verifications for apartments or when we're purchasing a car, and of course when we're looking for employment later on or, looking again. So I asked the gentleman what's he been up to for the last 14 months. What type of work he'd been doing. Now, he had been doing some general labor and utility with them previously, and I was wondering if he'd been exposed to any equipment or maybe different positions recently. His answer to me was, that doesn't matter. I didn't need to know if he'd been working anywhere. Was I going to give him a job? Well, I started to explain I'd like to understand what all he's qualified to do so I could check the open orders for a good fit. But about halfway through my thought, the applicant started really cussing at me and just hung up. Of course, if you know me at all, I had to do a little digging, wondering what could have been done a little differently or produced a better outcome here. I think the core issue could have been, you probably guessed it, my favorite word, communication. The candidate had been placed at 3 facilities over a period of about a year and a half. The first 2, he'd been reassigned due to attendance problems. I think the young man had some car problems. They were legit and certainly understandable. Things like that are going to happen from time to time. The third time, there appeared to be some notes about a family component, maybe a girlfriend issue. Anyway, again, he'd been dismissed for attendance. From what I could tell, the gentleman had called twice before, and his recruiter had asked about his transportation opportunities and had made a couple of notes that he had resolved everything and had some good, dependable transportation now. She explained to him that she didn't have any general labor positions right now, but that she'd give him a call when something came in, that she usually received new orders just about every week. It looked like that he had called back the very next day and got a different recruiter and was told the same thing. I can certainly understand the frustration. The gentleman needs a job. He needs some income. When you're told, "I'll give you a call as soon as something becomes available," it's hard not to want to call back and check on it or check in. And I don't feel there's anything wrong with that, but I think we have to be prepared to hear the same thing without getting frustrated or defensive. In this case, the gentleman had landed with someone that had the resources to have really helped him out. Having direct contact with, quite a few customers and so many ops guys in the field, sometimes I can make a few calls, even with no open position. When I found someone that, would just be a perfect fit with an organization, I can occasionally get them an interview anyway. Now, don't get me wrong, the gentleman didn't do anything wrong. I didn't mind his vulgarities. I know he was just very frustrated. He needed a job right then. I don't know if I would have been able to help him at all, but now we'll never know. Here's another one that really bothered me. 2 gentlemen were having words on a loading dock. Those words led to one man hitting the other one. Both men were dismissed and lost their jobs. Workplace violence is a real issue, and today there's no company that's going to tolerate it. There's absolutely no reason for anyone to touch another person in the workplace. During the investigation, I found that the supervisor on the floor determined that the employee that was on the receiving end of the punch had really kind of restrained himself and had really tried to diffuse the situation. He wanted to have kept him on, but felt like that, he had contributed to the mouthing off and talking a bunch of smack just as much as the other individual. His decision was to let them both go. Now, I spoke with this individual, the employee that had gotten hit, expressing that the proper action would have been to report the problem as soon as it started to his supervisor. He understood what I was saying, but didn't feel like he should have been terminated. In his eyes, it wasn't his fault. I certainly see his side, but the bottom line is he was. And like it or not, there is no gray area with workplace violence. The fact that he had joined in and argued with the other employee were actually grounds for termination at this facility. It doesn't necessarily mean that he can't be placed again. I think he did the right thing coming into his hiring agency and sharing his side of things. There will, of course, be an investigation, and based on what all I've heard so far, I'm sure he'll find another position pretty quickly. We've spoke about workplace violence on a couple of different episodes. Please don't get involved in these situations. The police could have actually been called, and the other guy could have found himself with an assault charge even. And one of my favorite experiences this week, shouldn't say favorite, I guess, because I really enjoyed talking with everyone all week long, but this one made me feel really good. So a person applied for a GL position, had a resume which listed a little unloading and sanitation experience, really sailed through the phone interview, and was asked to come in for an in-person visit. Talk about being super excited. He had just moved to the area like 2 weeks ago, gotten the family settled in, and started his job search using the different Facebook jobs groups. One of the first ads that he saw was for an unloader, so he applied. While speaking with him, we talked about his last 2 positions really in detail, or I thought that we had. I asked him if he ever thought about getting some equipment training or had any plans for learning more about warehousing and some, along the lines of advancement. He said, certainly. After all, working is about making money. He went on to say that he'd had about 4 years on a Toyota set-down counterbalance lift and about 2 years driving a stand-up lift. And about a year of that was using a slip sheet attachment on it. I was a little wowed at this point with his experience and asked why he hadn't added any of that to his resume. He stated that since he was applying for a GL position, he needed to show that he'd done that type of work before. As true as that thought was, if he had only written his equipment experiences and replied with that, who knows, he might not have even got the call for, the interview. The day before, there were no operator positions at all. Although I see the logic and can appreciate that he was just wanting to get his foot in the door somewhere, I think we should list all of our accomplishments, always. Maybe add that we're willing to start out doing something else, but I'd add everything. Possibly the phone interview would be the place to bring up more about our experiences. I think it's fine to list everything, but the important thing is to communicate our experiences, plan, and goals to the hiring agent. Anyway, to make a longer story a little shorter, I was able to help place him as a fork driver, making about 26% more than the position that he'd walked in the door for. What I learned this week was that recruiters are there to help us, to place us in positions that we can really be successful at. And remember, it's in their interest to fill those jobs for their companies. As we've discussed here at WAOC, it's our responsibility to be honest, respectable, prepared, and ready to talk with them. We honestly have such a short window to get so many of our points across. I could definitely tell who had prepared for the interviews and who just kind of came in to be interviewed. Getting our new job is one part of our struggle, and the more important part is keeping it, turning it into our careers. Remember, as our buddy Joe expresses to us all too often, it's called work for a reason. It's so important to keep our minds on the job when we're there. If we're doing that, we won't be talking smack with or talking anything about anybody. Things to argue about won't come up. If we're doing our job, we can't get into any trouble. We'll only succeed. Well, that's a little about my week. I hope you've had a great week as well. It's a holiday week for us here in the States. Time for family and friends. Shoot us an email to host@warehouseandoperationsasAcareer.com and share your week with the group. Until next week, happy Thanksgiving and have a safe week ahead.